What is going on, everyone? Mike Singer from blueandgold.com with our senior editor, Lou Somogyi. Happy April Fool's Day, folks. Hope you guys either tricked someone or had a good trick. Lou, how do you usually celebrate April Fool's Day?
Most people say every day is April Fool's with me, because I play the fool quite a bit.
I usually call my mother and mother-in-law and say, hey, my wife's pregnant, and they don't believe me anymore. But eventually, I'm just gonna. My wife's actually gonna be pregnant, and it's gonna be on April Fool's Day is when I tell them. But hey, that's neither here nor there. So let's talk about spring football. As we're recording this on Thursday, April 1st, Notre Dame has had 3 spring practices. One on Saturday, um, was that March 27th, and then on Tuesday, and now, of course, on Thursday. So, Lou, as someone who's been covering Notre Dame football as long as you have, um, is there anything comparable to, covering spring practice when all you get to see is 3 minutes of video that they send and Brian Kelly, once a week?
Yeah, the very first spring I covered for Blue and Gold was Lou Holtz's first season in 1986, and back then they had 25 practices, maybe 20. Every single one of them was open, and some of them were even open to the public. So that kind of gives you a base as to just how much things have changed through the years. I mean, 40 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, Jerry Faust, the Faust Fever, they had over like 1,000 people there just in attendance at the practice. They had ABC Wide World of Sports covering the practice. Sports Illustrated was out there to do a 6-page spread on Jerry Faust's first practice. And in fact, Sports Illustrated was here too, Lou Holtz's first practice in '86 as well. So, and they were all open. And at that time, we were saying, like, geez, it's drudgery going out there every day, seeing the same things all the time and all. But that was part of our job. So it's completely different now. You just get some of the breadcrumbs here and try to make an analysis off that.
Yeah, we're getting huge hits on our YouTube videos where, I'm narrating over 3 minutes of clips and then playing it again and talking about some pictures. Wow. Well, I mean, why do you think that's changed? Before we really dive into the topics, why do you think that's changed so much that, it was completely open with spectators to now Notre Dame would rather not have anyone there, COVID or not, at least in my opinion. Do you think it's just like a uh, world's just changed so much with the
Yeah.
smartphones and Twitter, and that they don't want everything being out there right away?
Yeah, I mean, like when I was referring to '86, it was us, the South Bend Tribune, maybe the student newspaper, the Observer, and on occasion the Chicago Tribune or Sun Times would come by as well. So it was just pretty laid back with the approach and everything. And I think, once you started getting it to the internet world there in the '90s and all, and everything was kind of out there in the open. I remember there was a Texas practice where a top player got injured, and it was put on, these Twitter. It wasn't even Twitter handles, but more so just on social media news and photos. And it's like people started to know even before the parents knew. And sort of, it's like, okay, we got to be able to at least have some control here. Otherwise, it's going to be a free for all. I remember the days, Mike, where I used to just be able to knock on a player's dorm room and say, "Hey, you have a few minutes for an interview and all," and that was fine and everything. You do that now, oh my gosh, with all the outlets that are available and out there, it would just be chaos.
Well, kudos to you, Lou,
So you
for
have to have it. You have to have some form of regulation here, and I understand that.
yeah. Well, kudos to you for being in this business for so long. So again, 3 practices so far. Um, Wanted to just kind of get general thoughts. I'm sure, Lou, you've been able to see the videos of all 3. But I want to preface this entire video and podcast by saying we are just getting breadcrumbs. I mean, Tyler Buckner could be absolutely lighting it up or absolutely stinking it up. We don't know. We are just getting what Notre Dame is sending us. So we're dissecting it as much as possible. But anything stand out to you, Lou? I think it might be more of a personnel and alignment type deals rather than who's looking good or not.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we talked about prior to the spring is how the offensive line would be such a Rubik's cubes because there could be so many different combinations at play and so much different experimentation. I think the initial practices we saw, for example, a tackle, Andrew Kristofic, working at center. And now in the most recent one, he was working at guard. I think Quentin Carroll's been cross training, maybe at guard and center. Michael Carmody, who we thought would be a guard, was listed as a tackle, started out there, and now took some reps at center. So, this is a lot of mixing and matching there. And we said this before spring and we'll stick to it. I mean, I'm not expecting any type of concrete statement at the end of spring. This is our starting five on the offensive line. I fully expect the competition and some of the position battles there to go right into the fall as well,
Yeah, yeah,
or at
absolutely.
least through August training camp.
And then I think offensive line certainly is something notable. Defensive line, something that Brian Kelly talked about was Myron Tagovailoa Amosa moving to that big end position. Howard Cross, Justin Adamalola, Jason Adamalola. Of course, Kurt Heinisch is going to be a nose. So it does seem like that multiple Notre Dame defense. We'll hear from Brian Kelly what he has to say about the linebackers here a little bit later in this podcast and video. But certainly it's kind of interesting. Like, yeah, there's going to be multiple fronts. It's going to be 3-man fronts, and I'm sure there's going to be a good bit of 4-man fronts as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it several times, and Brian Kelly hasn't been shy about stating it that they'll have Myron out on the end position as well, and perhaps have Jason Adamalola at that inside position three, or they might just go with a regular 3-man line there. Maybe it's Foskey and Adamalola flanking Kurt Heinisch, but then you can have a 4-man line too with perhaps. Myron then shifting to the inside, and then you could have an end combination, maybe of Isaiah Foskey or Justin Adamalola, or perhaps either Nana Alsofa Mensa, who we saw fairly visible in the third practice there from the video that was furnished to us by Notre Dame. So there's a lot of mixing and matching there as well as Marcus Freeman tries to instill and just find that identity for his defense based on the personnel he feels will best fit it.
Just talking about this stuff, Lou. I mean, this is what the message boards, especially at Rockies Roundtable, boy, love this kind of fodder. Like who's lining up where, who's moving positions. Speaking of the blueandgold.com message board, we have a really good promo going on right now. If you use the promo code SPRINGBALL, you get if you buy a month subscription, you get 4 months free. So we'll pop this on the screen for our YouTube audience here. Use promo code SPRINGBALL. You get 1 month, or excuse me, purchase 1 month, and then you get 4 months free. So again, promo code SPRINGBALL. I think let's move into talking about this offensive line, Lou. Specifically, I mean, I've got pages and pages of notes that I'm taking while I'm doing these YouTube videos and narrating practice for our podcast audience. Make sure you go to Blue and Gold on our YouTube page. Go to youtube.com, search Blue and Gold Illustrated. You should be able to find our YouTube page there. No problem. Here's kind of what I put together based on today's practice. This is first team, like very tentative people. Like this is not what's gonna trot out at Florida State. Well, maybe, but probably not. Like so, just pump the brakes. This is just from what.
Well, I can tell you a guy named Patterson will probably be in
Yes,
that.
definitely. Yeah, definitely want to touch on Patterson. But so this is what it's on the first and the second teams. The left side of the line has been very consistent. It's Tosh Baker on that first team left tackle. Dylan Gibbons has been regularly the left guard. Zeke Correll Whether Patterson comes back or not seems very likely to be that center. We can discuss Patterson here in a minute. Andrew Kristofic, I slotted here at right guard. I think it's Dirksen who's played some right guard as well. And then right tackle Josh Lugg, who I want to touch on here in a minute, has been regularly the right tackle. In the second team, Blake Fisher has regularly been the left tackle, and it's been interesting that he's coming in, and I felt like, and I think you agree with me, Lou, that if he was going to play as a freshman, it'd probably be at guard, because left tackle that's a big ask, to cover to block the opposing team's best defensive end. But Notre Dame sees him as a tackle, at least right now. Next to him, Fisher's probably best friend, Rocco Spindler, another true freshman. At center today was interesting. I believe it was in the first practice. Carmody was even at right tackle, but he was lining up at center in Thursday's practice. Right guard put John Dirksen, but I think him and Kristofic seem a little bit more interchangeable at this point. And again, we're speculating here. We get breadcrumbs. And then Quentin Carroll, you mentioned, has played some guard as well. He's been a good bit of tackle. Here was from my notes another second team. Fisher at left tackle, Spindler left guard, Kristofic has been some at center, and like I mentioned, Quinn Carroll at right guard and Carmody at right tackle. So, what do you think of the Rubik's Cube now that we have at least breadcrumbs of information from Notre Dame?
Well, a couple things I take from it. One is that the three starters, I think that I'm most safe in stating that will be there against Florida State if they're all healthy, of course. It seems they are very well settled with Zeke Correll at
Yeah,
center. Um, it's like they're ready to make that move because when Brian Kelly talked about the tackle position and how Josh Lugg will likely move inside to guard once August starts. I mean, the bells are sounding that, okay, that means that Jared Patterson probably is moving to the outside. And that's where that one competition for a starting spot at the other tackle spot, whether it's left or right, is going to be more open. And then, of course, with Corral and Patterson, you have Lugg kind of automatically maybe making that move to the inside. Very versatile figure. He started at center. He started 5 games, the last 5 games at right tackle, basically last 6 in 2019. So, those are the 3 guys there that I would say are the best bets. Certainly Jared Patterson. I mean, he's captain material, third-year starter, had a really good year before his injury against Boston College on November 14th. But from there, it's like pick the other 2. But not only that, but okay, is Lugg going to be staying at tackle and Jared Patterson would be the left tackle? Or do they really feel good about Tosh Baker or Blake Fisher at the left tackle and then move Jared to right tackle and then shift Josh Lugg to the inside? Or keep Josh Lugg on the outside and put Jared Patterson at guard, at one of the guard positions? It's so wide open and there are so many different combinations that you can go through there, Mike.
it's really interesting. I mean, I didn't even notice this, but if you go to a blueandgold.com article, Notre Dame spring practice number 3 videos, takeaways, and observations, I didn't notice this, but Patrick Engel, our beat writer, said he saw Fisher at left tackle with what seemed to be the first team. So yeah, it's very unsettled, but it's exciting to talk about, because this is our first look at this Notre Dame football team in the 2021 season. You mentioned Josh Lugg, and Kelly said he's going to slide inside. So my kind of thought is maybe that left side of the line, Baker Gibbons is solid. Zeke Correll center. Maybe you slide Lugg into right guard, and maybe Patterson at right tackle. What would you think about that line?
Yeah, that's one of the options I mentioned. And a second thing I wanted to mention also, because I said there are 2 things. Every spring, and last year was an exception because you returned all the 5 starters there. But like in 2017, it was early entrant Robert Hainsey, a guy who really worked himself into a co starting position. In 2018, the guy they wanted to really start getting in there was Aaron Banks. Early in the season, he was being utilized at left tackle and almost like as a third tight end, a blocker there in the big jumbo packages, goal line situations. And he got in there. In 2019, out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere, sophomore Jared Patterson, who was a left tackle, first day of spring practice, he comes out as the starting center. So what I'm getting at is that this spring, it seems the guy, the youngster, that freshman, sophomore type of guy that they're looking to really hope makes that impression is Tosh Baker,
Yeah.
perhaps at that left tackle position. He's been getting the reps there. Is he physically ready? I think Liam Eichenberg, during the conference call prior to Pro Day, when he was asked about younger players, he said, Tosh has it all. It's just really a matter of physical strength. So the summer is going to be an important part for him as far as just continuing to grow that body, because I said this on another, it was on the WSBT broadcast yesterday, but Tasha's frame, he's 6'8". Mike McGlinchey was 6'7" when he came in. Both that long, lean, angular frame. And with both of them, their freshman and sophomore years, you said, you know what, this guy can put on another 50 pounds and you might not even notice it,
Mm.
because that's just how lean and just how their physique is. So I don't know if maybe Tasha's still a year away or so, but it seems that the coaches want to give him every opportunity to be able to earn that left tackle spot. And he's going to get some good competition too, it looks like, from Blake Fisher, because there's another guy that they may be looking at as, this could be the future here at that position, which has been just tremendous in the Kelly era. One of maybe the best in college football over the last 11 years, single position.
For our YouTube audience, you can see Tosh Baker, number 79, there on the right side of your screen at left tackle. Notre Dame, when they sent us pictures, I don't think Baker has been featured yet, but in the videos, like, he looks like he's put on a good bit of weight. He looks over 300 pounds. It's really interesting, Lou, is when he was a recruit. Um, Looking at his rivals page, he was as high as number 44 in the country. He was a borderline 5-star guy. And then he dropped from 44 and he finished at number 137 because I honestly don't know. It was something at the All American Bowl. He looked a little slight, or he wasn't playing because of an injury, so his toughness was questioned. I can't speak for rivals on why he was dropped to 137, but you know, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here. It's 3 days and 9 total minutes of video, and we're not there to see maybe Tosh Baker's getting beat on every play, but I don't know. If the potential works out, because again, this was a guy who was a borderline 5-star prospect and probably should have. That's where he should have been at the end of the day. He has potential 4-year starter, or he probably wouldn't. If he's a 3-year starter, you'd probably think he would go after that third season. But he's a guy who could get this left tackle position and then never give it up.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened with Zach Martin. He redshirted as a freshman in 2009, and then the next 4 years, he started every game, a school record 52 consecutive games, became a first-round pick, and now is a perennial All-Pro. Now, I'm not saying that that's the path that Tosh Baker would take too, but throughout the Kelly era, it looks like they have pegged somebody. This is our future at left tackle, whether it was Zach Martin, followed by Ronnie Stanley, who started for a year at right tackle before moving over to the left tackle when Martin graduated. Same thing with Mike McGlinchey. He was on the right side, and then it's like, okay, he is our future at the left tackle position. And same thing with Liam Eichenberg, 3-year starter there. They peg them pretty early by their going into their sophomore year. It's like, okay, this is our future that we're going to build around at that left tackle position. And possibly that's what they may be looking at with either Tosh or even Blake Fisher.
Moving along in the Irish huddle here, we're going to hear from Brian Kelly, and then Lou and I will discuss what we thought about Kelly's quotes. This first soundbite from Kelly, this is from his Saturday press conference. This is him talking about the Notre Dame offensive line.
A couple of guys we know, like Zeke is slotted in at that center position, Zeke Carroll. Josh Lugg is going to play a tackle, but most likely will slide back into the guard position when the season starts. And so you're going to see a big battle for one of the tackle positions and, one of the guard positions. So, you're going to see a little bit of everybody. Tosh Baker, we saw him starting in one of our units today. Dylan Gibbons was starting. John Dirksen was starting. We really like the progress of Carmody is coming along. I mentioned Christophic, the young freshmen, both the young freshman linemen that are mid-years got a chance to step in with the second group. So kind of a little bit of both of what you said is that everybody's going to get into the mix. We kind of have a plan of how this should look. Quentin Carroll is another guy that had a really good offseason. So a lot of names. We got to kind of sort it out as it goes here.
So interesting, similar to what we talked about. What he was basically saying was Zeke Carroll, he's going to start. Josh Lugg is going to play one of those guards. So the battles are the two tackle spots and then one of the guard spots. And you mentioned that Carroll and Lugg are kind of penciled in, or lack for a better term, but and then Patterson is a likely starter. He didn't mention Patterson probably because maybe they don't know at this point if he's a tackle or a guard.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think the preference probably would be the tackle position. That's what he came in at left tackle, and maybe it's a 1 year deal with him there before either a Tosh Baker or a Blake Fisher might be able to take over, or in the interim, maybe Blake moves to another position. But I do think it seems that Tosh Baker is going to be a left tackle in his career here. That's where they have him slotted the same way that a Zeke Carroll. It's like, okay, you're a center, and we're not going to fiddle around trying to find another spot where you would best fit. So, yeah, that's where the battles are going to be, is one of the tackle positions and one of the guard positions, depending on who the fourth and fifth best linemen prove to be. Because right now, obviously, Jared Patterson is far and away number one, and with Josh Lugg, the second most experienced, and then Zeke Carroll, who is really just very well developed for that center position.
Yeah, and did a nice job last season. As much as I love versatility, and Josh Lugg has that, you need a left tackle. Liam Eichenberg might not be that per Brian Kelly, but that's a different discussion for a different day, at least for the NFL level. But Tosh Baker, yeah, a left tackle all the way. And then, you think about this 2022 recruiting class. As a side note, like Ty Chan, who they're bringing in, like he reminds me a little bit of Tosh Baker when you're discussing upside. Like Chan is not one of those guys who I feel like is well, maybe he's a guard, like tackle, tackle all the way with that length. And athleticism. Let's move into another interesting topic that came from Kelly. Him discussing Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner. We'll go ahead and play that clip.
What do we want from Drew Pine? We want Drew to be the starter. We're not handing this job to Jack Cohn. So Drew's been in the program. So we want him in the spring. To be competing for this starting position, and they'll have an opportunity to do that where they get first team reps. And then Tyler Tyler just got here and he hasn't played football for a year, so you got to understand there's some development that has to take place there. And he had a nice practice today, but he doesn't know our offense, and just the basics is really what he's trying to feel good about today. And so he's got some, obviously some work to do from that perspective, but He's a quick study. He's a really good athlete. But that, I hope, answers the question relative to what we want Drew to do, and that is, compete to be the starter.
Wanted to first give my thoughts there, Lou. He's not saying I want Drew to be the starter over Jack Cohn. He's saying like we want Drew to be in competition with Jack Cohn. I don't think that wasn't like a favoritism statement. That was a I want him to compete statement. And the other thing, which actually wasn't in this that clip, but he would go on to say about Tyler Buckner that or actually he did say that in that clip about Tyler Buckner is just learning our offense. Well, I've seen some comments about, well, Jack Cohn is just learning the offense. Those guys got to Notre Dame at the very same time, but the difference is Jack Cohn has, 18 Big Ten starts, and Tyler Buckner, has started one season of high school football.
Yeah, going back to that comment, I think that's been so misinterpreted about we want Drew Pine to be the starter. The way I took that was we think very highly of Jack Cohn, which is why we brought him here. And if Drew Pine is good enough to beat out Jack Cohn, that means he had a heck of a spring and summer and August to be able to get to that position. That was why we recruited Drew Pine, to eventually be the starter. Would that be in 2021 or 22? Who knows? But that is what they recruited him for, is to eventually become a starter at Notre Dame. But with all that said, I think it would be a surprise to anyone if Jack Cohn is not taking the snaps in the opener against Florida State, if provided he, of course, stays healthy.
And the last clip we'll hear from Kelly on is him talking about replacing Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and really how hard that will be.
We're going to do things that allow, to get another linebacker on the field. We're not, I don't know that we're replacing, the kind of player that we had with Owusu. So you're going to see a combination of players out there. We know if we're in a strictly a rover situation, you'll see, Pryor, you'll see Moala, you're going to see Kaiser out there. And at times you might even see three linebackers. So I think it's a combination of all those things, Tim.
So when he said three linebackers, he means more like, a Mike, a Will, and then like another inside back, or not more like a rover type body. And when we've talked about Isaiah Pryor in our previous podcast, we were talking about him listed as a safety. Like, is he moving back there? Does seem like that confirmed that, yes, he's a rover. But, now Notre Dame has to have that coverage rover and more like a true thumper linebacker rover, whereas Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was both because he was just that darn good.
Yeah. And maybe that creates a situation where Bo Bauer, the backup for Drew White at Mike linebacker, and Drew White are on the field at the same time, as opposed to last year, it was more of a tag team where White would play the first two downs, and then on third down or passing situations or sub packages, Bo Bauer would come in. I think he played about 290 snaps or so. So that's a pretty good allotment of work. The feeling was that they're good in a tag team role, but maybe not the best on the field together. That didn't work in last year's system. Maybe with this year, they both do. Meanwhile, the rover position, that sounds very similar to what the Buck and now the named Will position at the weak side was last year. You lost Asmar Bilal as the starter, and it became a position by committee. Shane Simon, Maris Lufa, and Jack Kaiser all were there. So the preference is you have somebody who is good enough to seize the position and be able to be that full-time starter there because of the trust and reliability and consistency factors there. And then having somebody that you develop behind him and hope that there's not a significant drop off. We have that old, cliche about, if you have 3 starters at one position, you have no starters at a position, whether it's at quarterback or any place else. We talked about running back last year, that this was going to be by committee, and there's 4 or 5 different guys. Well, there was one guy who took over the position, and that was what was really preferable, Kyron Williams, as far as this guy is somebody we can rely on week after week for 15 to 20 touches, and we have some good change-ups here with a Chris Tyree, and if needed, be a Sibo Flemister. And I think that would be the preference with this type of competition at the rover or other linebacker positions as well.
All right, well, that is going to do it for this episode of the Irish Huddle, recapping the first 3 practices of spring football. Make sure you use that promo code SPRINGBALL at blueandgold.com. Your first month of access when you purchase that. Then you'll get 4 extra on top of that, which brings you well into fall camp and the start of the football season right around there. So appreciate you guys watching this podcast on YouTube, listening wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you rate, review, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We will catch you guys next Thursday. Take care.